All right, so we're talking about the unification of Germany. So Germany was made up of a bunch of independent city-states, and these city-states were led by Austria, who you guys know of from our discussions of Metternich, from our discussions of Maria Theresa. We've also talked some about Prussia, Prussia being militarily dominated by Frederick the Great. So Prussia at this point has a guy named Wilhelm, and he wants to have a united Germany. He thinks this would be best for all parties. His leader is a guy named Otto von Bismarck. Bismarck is going to be really important during this unit. So Otto von Bismarck comes up with this policy. It's called Realpolitik, which means politics of reality. I know. So Bismarck believes in that this policy is really going to help them get control by any means necessary. It's very Machiavellian. And so Bismarck is one of these Junkers who is a conservative member of the landowning class, and he goes and tries to make a Germany more unified through what he calls blood and iron. Blood and iron, the idea being that he will unify by having strong industry and a strong military. So Prussia decides that they're going to start a whole bunch of wars with a whole bunch of people to show their dominance and also to get other Germans along their side. Awkward transition. All right, we're moving on to the next slide here. All right, so Otto von Bismarck starts 3 main wars. The 7 Weeks War is going to be a big war where they stirred up border conflicts with Austria over 2 different areas that could have kind of gone either way. And so the Prussians are able to humiliate Austria. Austria is going to lose Venice, which ends up being given to Italy, which we talked about last class period. And so they had to also accept the Prussian annexation of more of this territory. This gave Prussia control of northern Germany. You've also got the Franco-Prussian War, where Bismarck basically tricked the French into attacking them, and so made up all these incidents, said all these things to make it look like the French had insulted the Prussians, and basically ends up tricking them into starting a war that they will inevitably lose. This is going to be the last stage in German unification. The French are going to lose 2 really important territories called Alsace and Lorraine, and this is going to make them really, really mad, and we'll talk more about that when we get to World War I. There's a huge shift in the balance of power once Germany unifies in 1871. They call the new leader Kaiser, which is Caesar, and so they create this new nation of Germany. After the Congress of Vienna in 1815, after Napoleon, there had been 5 major countries that were powerful. Now by 1871, Britain and Germany are by far the most powerful, and we'll talk about why Britain next class period. But these guys have the most money and the most military, so this makes them really significant. And we'll go through that with World War I. Here is Kaiser Wilhelm. Check out his sweet hat. We will come back to him and his hat later on. This is not Kaiser Wilhelm. It's Otto von Bismarck. My bad. Space Cadet. So there's a big revolution artistically during this time as well. We've talked about a lot of different changes going on in the world since the Enlightenment, and this extends out to art and literature. People start to look more at ideas of the Enlightenment, and during the 1800s, people start to think more about freedom, individualistic, and this idealistic view of history. And from this comes this idea of Romanticism. Romanticism is really this emphasis not just on love, but this idea that glorifies heroes, that really emphasizes this whole concept of nationalism and gets people thinking about, wow, everything was great when the Germans were German and men were men and blah, blah, blah. Really focusing back to those. So you'll see a lot of hugely patriotic paintings. You'll read these novels that are about all these different changes going on during this time, or things that used to make things great. So you'll look back on paintings of the Romans or paintings of the Renaissance or whatever time period the place that you're studying is. You'll find that these people are painting these things back. I'll show you guys some examples of this in a few minutes. The other thing is that as things are starting to get more complicated and there's a lot of other rebellions and things going on, people start to focus on nature, on simpler times, on old folk traditions and things like that in order to promote these nationalistic motives and get people thinking about, it was so great when the Greeks were Greek, why are we under the Ottomans? So there's a big focus in nature and a big focus in the thoughts and feelings of the individual, which is going to push forward this nationalistic idea that gives people the rights of more freedoms, but also more thinking about the state. People also start to turn away from the reason that was a big emphasis during the Enlightenment and start thinking more about emotions. And so you can see emotions in examples of works like Les Miserables by Victor Hugo, which is also a romanticized view of the French Revolution and the time period immediately after. The Hunchback of Notre Dame, also a famous romantic book by Victor Hugo. Gothic novels like Frankenstein start to become popular during this time. And this is where music starts to become a big thing. So here's some Johann Sebastian Bach for you. Oh, nope, my phone is not playing it. So Bach is a Baroque composer. Baroque is a time period in which, Baroque is a style of art in which things are really, really ornate and really, really overdone. Later it will blend on to become something called Rococo. You guys have probably also heard of Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. So like I said, you guys have heard of Mozart. So Mozart made classical music. Classical music kind of harkened back to some idea, a simpler style that goes back to Enlightenment times. Here's some Mozart music for you. Maybe. Mozart was from Salzburg, Austria. He spent some of his time in Vienna as well. If you ever get a chance to go, it's a gorgeous place. So next we'll be talking about Miguel de Cervantes. Wrote a book called Don Quixote. It's supposed to be one of the greatest books of all time. My understanding is it's about a crazy dude who runs around with his buddy Sancho Panza chasing after a woman who doesn't like him. With that said, I've not read all of Don Quixote, so don't take it from me, ask your Spanish teacher. Don Quixote is often called the first modern novel, and so Cervantes is seen as one of these great authors of modern times. Also, he is kind of poking a little bit of satire at these poor noblemen and trying to get people thinking more in terms of freedom and things like that. Oh, here I am in Salzburg. I have one of those pictures up earlier. So Salzburg, Austria, home of Mozart and a lot of other famous musician-style folks. And so Salzburg's a beautiful place if you get a chance to go. You can see his Gerbert house, or where he was born, which has a whole bunch of really interesting artifacts. These are things I meant to play music over before. And this is also where he spent most of his life, and I believe where he died. And so Mozart had a pretty tragic life. If you have extra time, you should watch Amadeus. It's a beautiful movie. You won't regret it. Lastly, you should go to Salzburg, Austria, because you can have a schnitzel as large as your hand. Schnitzel is a delicious fried piece of pork. You won't regret it. This was a lot cooler when I had music to go with it. All right, so lastly, we'll be talking about Eugene Delacroix. So Delacroix is a big romantic painter during this time. His painting, Lady Liberty Leading the People, is a beautiful painting that you can see at the Louvre. It's going to be roughly about the size of this wall that I'm projecting onto. It is enormous. He did a lot of illustrated work for printed Shakespeare, not for Shakespeare himself. And so he's going to be a really significant artist as far as this glorification of other culture or French culture and things like that. Thanks for playing along.